recording, just so that way if anybody has any questions or wants to go back and look at it, you guys can definitely do that. And we'll put it on the YouTube channel, and I'll make sure that everybody has that as well. So today we'll be talking about buyer's forms and what that looks like. We'll kind of go over them in detail. As always, very interactive. So if you guys have questions, just let me know. Raise your hand or unmute your mic or whatever you guys would like. And so there you go. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen so you guys can see. So here's our Google Drive, and I put the Google Drive link in the comments to where we have all of our buyer, seller, tenant forms. These are also the same forms that are in the black binder that are in the office. And we put this up here just prior to COVID, just in case anybody needed them online. These forms are also in Instanet through MLS, and they're also in DocuSigns. You can access them in any ways. We just wanted to make sure that everybody knew where they were. So if we go into the buyer files, I'll just click here. Here's all of the different forms and amendments and addendums that you can use and that may be part of a transaction. Now, you may not need to use all of these forms as part of the transaction, yet here if you need them. So I would say that when working with buyers and for your buyer's forms, one of the first things that you'll want to make sure that you give to your buyer is the customer information form. So there's a comfort, you click here. Can everybody see the screen and see the forms that we're working with?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. So this is going to be your customer information form. Louisiana Real Estate Commission requires that you give this to your clients immediately upon starting to work with them. So I would say your first in-person meeting or so, you should probably give them this form or the form that's called the customer information pamphlet. It both says the same thing. It just depends if you want a pamphlet style or the one sheet. So Louisiana Real Estate Commission also asks that you get them to sign it, acknowledging that they received it. You may have some times where the potential buyer doesn't want to sign it. They're afraid it's a contract. Some of them will sign it right away. Some of them won't. That's okay. Just make sure you note when you gave it to them, and then they can always sign it as they're signing part of their buyer's package with the purchase agreement, the lead-based paint when they find the property. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I think.
What's the best way that you explain this to the buyers?
That's a great question. I usually just share that Louisiana Real Estate Commission requires that I provide them with a customer information form that just lets them know what customers or clients need to know when working with an agent and some definitions and some terms. So I'm sending over the document or I'm handing it to them. I'll also say that Louisiana Real Estate Commission requests that we get it signed to show that we made a good faith effort to provide that to you. And then you can just kind of get the feel from them. Some of them are like, okay, I'll sign it, no problem. And some of them may not be comfortable signing it right here. At least at that point, you know that you just notate when you first gave it to them. And then when they're purchasing a property, you can put that in with all of the other documents they need to sign.
Gotcha.
Any other questions on that? All right, so let's go over a bit of terminology. So when you have your purchase agreement and there's a change that needs to be made to the purchase agreement, that's when you're going to use an amendment. So just think amend is to change, and anything that needs to be added to the purchase agreement is going to be an addendum. So just think ADD. We also have a buyer's agency agreement that you can use If you want to personalize it, that's online as well. I always recommend that you have a buyer's agency agreement and go over that with your potential buyers. It just kind of gives them some expectations. This is where you can also put that the amount of the compensation is X amount or 3% of the purchase price, and then kind of go over that. Traditionally, the seller pays for the commission, and it's included in the cost of the sales price. This will also protect you in the event that you find them a property that may be a first buy owner or that may be a 1% offering listing. And that way you can come back to them and negotiate your commission through them. So there's a form that you can, we have a templated out. Some people kind of create their own and add a few things to this as well. So this is here for you to use as well. Has everybody seen that the buyer's agency agreement?
I haven't. That's my first time
Yeah.
seeing it.
Okay. Here's another one. So there's a couple different ones that you guys can use and kind of go through as far as, and again, you know, these are in DocuSign, they're in Instanet, and then they're on our drive as well. So there's just a couple different ones that you guys can use.
Jody, are you
questions
going to
on
email
those?
the drive to us? Are you going to email the drive? Because I can't copy and paste it for some reason from the chat.
Sure, I can do that. Yes, let me just make a note real quick. And if you go to your Google Drive, do you know how to open your Google Drive?
No, I do not.
Okay, so if you go, whether you have your email open or anything, if you go to these 9 little dots, I'm going to move you for just, and then you click on Drive. So when you have your email open or your calendar open, you go to these 9 little dots and click Google Apps and then click Drive. And when you go to Drive, something like this will come up and you can hit Shared with Me and it should be right there. And then you can just Google, you know, buyer files or even KW Docs seller buyer files. Yeah, I'll make sure in the next email that it's sent out as well.
Stable.
All right, so let's dive into the purchase agreement. So we want to make sure that we're using the purchase agreement that's dated 1/1/19. Because there were, in January of last year, there were some updates. So we'll kind of go over most of this. Well, okay, we're having a little bit of a technology challenge, so hang tight for just a second. Okay, here we go. Can everybody see this, the purchase agreement?
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect.
I don't see.
I can understand head nods, but nobody has their camera on except for Vishay, so I can't even see head nods. So they're gonna have to unmute and talk to me at some point, right? Okay, so when you're filling out your purchase, yes, sir. Oh, TJ, you're frozen.
I'm
You're good?
frozen.
Yeah, well, not anymore. You're good. Okay, so when filling out your purchase agreement, you want to make sure that you're putting in the listing firm, the seller's designated agent, and their license number. This is how you can get that when you go into when you go into Matrix or when you go into MLS, you'll see who the listing agent is. You'll have their phone number, you'll have their listing firm, and some agents put in their license number and their brokerage number. So if that's in the agent comments, that's where you can pull the information from there. If that's not in there, then one of the ways that you can check it is to go to lrec.gov and you click verify a license and then you search. So, probably let me do this. Let me just do this because there's a whole lot in there. Honda, I'm going to use you since there's probably
1,000 of me.
yeah. So you can basically find the agent that you're looking for, and then this is their license number. So once you click on that, then it's going to tell you who their brokerage is. So then you just click on their sponsor or their brokerage, and then it gives you the brokerage license number. Any questions on that?
Would the if you went to the agent search in the MLS, is that data not reliable? If you were looking up
Sometimes the license number is not in MLS. So if it's not in MLS, then this is another way that you can find it. But make sure you're not leaving that blank. It's part of the contract, and the contract should be completed in full. Your phone number, your office, your fax, all of that stuff can be found in MLS. Now, where it says delivered by designated agent to, so if you are writing the offer on behalf of your client, you're going to write who you're delivering the offer to right here. Like you're going to put, as representing the buyer, you're going to put the listing agent's information here, the date and the time that you're sending it over. Comments can be, if you want to put via Instanet, via DocuSign, and then when that agent receives it, that agent is going to sign or should sign or type their name right here and put the date and time that they received it. So also on the flip side of that, if you receive an offer, when you receive it, you need to note that you received it. So you can either write or sign your name here and the date and the time, the day, the date, and the time that you received it. We see a lot of this left blank, and LREC requires this. So this could be something that if LREC does an audit and it's not so the next one is the date. So it would be the date of
You're
full
breaking up.
address of the contract city. It may be, is it better now?
Talk. Oh, sweet.
Okay, so then you're going to put in your city, your zip, your parish, and then the legal description. Sometimes the legal description is in the MLS, and sometimes it's not. So when it's not in there, the best way for you to do this, let's look up a property. Does somebody have a property under contract right now?
I do.
What's the address on it?
8703 Monroe Court.
We're going to use that as an example. So congratulations on having that under contract. Okay. So great job on putting the legal description in there. So as you're filling this contract out, you can use this as the legal description, or if this is blank, you can come over here and go to the realist, the TX button, and Realist will pop up. Sometimes it pops up right away. Sometimes you have to hit launch. Sometimes it pops up right away, and sometimes you have to enter all of this information. So as you're rolling through here, you'll see the legal description. Does everybody see how you can find the legal description? So if it's not in MLS, then this is where you would copy and paste and pull it from there. And you're gonna have on lands or grounds measuring approximately. This is where you put in the lot size. Sometimes you can find it on this Realist at the very bottom. It'll give you the lot size, and it should also be in the MLS. So you can pull it from either one of those two options. As we're going through on line 20, your line 20 is where you're going to put if there's any movable items that are to remain with the property. This could be, usually this is dishwasher, range oven, refrigerator, washer, dryer. If it's not a combined range oven, then it could be cooktop, it could be a stove, it could be a double oven or an oven. In MLS, you're usually going to see where the appliances are included: cooktop, dishwasher, microwave, refrigerator, range oven. Even if it's listed in MLS, I would always be specific with what you're putting in this line right here to make sure you include everything that your buyer wants to stay. If, let's say they're asking for a couch or maybe a bedroom set, put that in there as well. Anything that's in the house that can physically be moved out of the house, this is where you'll put that. The exclusions to the property, let's say there's a washer and dryer that's in the home that is not listed here and the seller is not agreeing to leave. So any of the appliances that are going to be excluded, this is where you'd put it here. And I would tell you it's better to put it here than to not, so that there's no confusion on the buyer's end or the seller's end. Let's say you have a buyer that thinks all the appliances are included because the listing agent said all the appliances are included, or we may have said it, yet we were not referring to the washer and dryer. And then it confuses them if the washer and dryer is included or not. So anything that's excluded. Sometimes there may be opportunities where the seller is not leaving the curtains or not leaving the window treatments, or maybe it's a chandelier that they're taking with them. So that's where we would put any of these that would not be included and that the seller is taking with them. Any questions?
Nope.
Okay. All right, so as we move on, you'll just want to make sure your buyer's initial at every page. You also put your property address at the top and the date for every page as well. Mineral rights, traditionally in this part of the state, we don't have a lot of mineral rights that are withheld or that are transferred. So this is going to be, more often than not, this is going to be 0 on mineral rights. And this says that if there's any mineral rights, the seller is reserving what percentage. So you want it to say 0. If for any reason it says something other than 0, you need to really look into that, because if it says 100%, it means that the seller may be selling the property, but they're going to reserve any mineral rights that are associated with that. So let's say in areas where they may have some drilling. Sometimes on drilling and land rights and land contracts, if you have a drilling site that's within a couple 100 miles or 50 miles of a property, all of those property owners get mineral rights based on the production of that well. So you always want to make sure that that says 0, and if it doesn't say 0, then look into that a little bit more and really make sure that that just wasn't an error. Your property price is where you'll put lines 33 to 35. Your active sale or your closing date is where you'll enter on line 38. As we're moving through for the contingencies, you have 2 options. The sale is contingent on the sale of another property, or the sale is not contingent. And that just means, does the buyer need to sell another property in order to proceed with the sale of this offer? Any questions? Okay.
There we go.
Yeah. So finance, this is going to be where it's an all cash sale, and the buyer is truly, you'll put that there. If it's a finance sale, whether it's traditional financing through a lender or whether it's hard money financing, I'm going to break up again because it says connection unstable. So just bear with me. If it's a financed sale, then you'll put the information here. Does everyone know the difference between like traditional financing and hard money lenders?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
So sometimes on your what's called hard money lenders is you have a non-traditional lender or non-traditional bank that will loan the money, typically for a shorter time period than 30 years and typically at a much higher interest rate. And sometimes this is a benefit for maybe some buyers that want to purchase that maybe don't have the best credit, or maybe they don't have any credit at all, which shows up as a lower credit score. And so sometimes they may find some untraditional financing or a hard money lender that may lend them the money for 5 years or 10 years, maybe at a much higher interest rate, while they can kind of rebuild their credit before finding traditional funding. Sometimes when buyers have a hard money lender, they know that they're getting the money from the lender. And so sometimes they want to put it as an all cash sale. And I would be very cautious in letting you put it as an all cash sale if there's truly any financing involved, because in the event that you don't choose a finance sale and you're saying that it's a cash sale, you lose the option to opt out of the contract or cancel the contract because of lack of financing. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
So if you're paying cash, if your buyer is paying cash, your buyer does not have the option or the opportunity to cancel the contract due to financing falling through. So as we move on to the finance sale, you can do one of 2 ways as you're filling this out, where it says for the loan sum of, you can put the actual loan amount, or more often than not, you can put NA right there, and then you just put the loan percentage of the sale. So that way, in the event that there's a counter or the sales price changes, whether it's through the countering process or whether it's through the inspection negotiation process, you don't have to come back in and change this actual dollar amount. You can just change the percentage. So if you have an FHA loan where the buyer is putting 3.5% down, then this amount is going to be 96.5%. If you have a conventional and maybe they're putting a conventional 3% or conventional 5%, you would put the appropriate number from there. So basically you take your 100% minus the percent they're putting down, and then this is what you would put right there. The interest rate not to exceed X%. This is not locking them into the interest rate. What this is this is saying that in the event they cannot qualify or obtain a loan for this percentage at with X percent down and not to exceed, let's call it 5%, they can cancel the contract due to financing terms. So let's use an example here. If you've got somebody that's FHA and they're putting 3.5% down, and the rates right now, or let's say the rates are in the 3.5% to 4% range. Let's just say as they're rolling through it and rates jump up to 5% or rates jump up to 6% and they're not locked in, that increase in the rate may not qualify them because their monthly note will increase and then they may no longer qualify. So it's important for you to put a rate amount here, yet letting the buyer know they're not locked into that amount. So if the lender is telling you, hey, we're at 4%, then maybe you put 4.5%, put a 0.5 point up in case the rates change. And then you can put amortize over a period of not less than, ask them what they're doing. Are they doing 15 years, 30 years? No matter what they put here, they're not necessarily bound to it. They just need to show good faith, and this is what type of loan they're applying for, that they've already applied for and have been pre-approved for. And then you'll type in whether it's fixed rate, FHA, conventional, RD, rural development, or VA. Any questions so far? Okay. So the buyer agrees to pay discount points of not to exceed. Right now, we're in a market, we're lucky enough to be in a market that the buyer may not need to pay discount points. This was added as our contract because there were times when interest rates were 9, 12, 15, 18. And so in order for them to bring their interest rate down, they would, they may buy points to buy that interest rate down. I usually just put NA here, not, if interest rates change, then that might be different. And then other financing conditions. This is always good to look at this part of the contract. And the reason is there are some agents that will write if the buyer wants closing costs, seller to pay buyers, or seller to pay $5,000 towards buyer's closing cost and prepaid items at the active sale. Some agents put it here as a condition of financing, and then some agents put it in the additional terms and conditions. I think you could go one way or the other. I usually just say, hey, let's put it in both places so that it's clearly noted. Yet there's been times where maybe the listing agent overlooks it and doesn't see it in this area. And so they may not share that with their seller. So just make sure you're looking in both areas. The next section is very important, where it basically advises that the buyer shall supply the seller within written documentation from a lender that a loan application has been made and the buyer has given written authorization to the lender to proceed with the loan approval process within X number of calendar days after the date of acceptance of the offer by both parties. This is not the pre-approval letter. You can absolutely send your pre-approval letter, your pre-qual letter with the offer. This does not fulfill this requirement. What this is as once you have an accepted offer, you send the accepted offer to the buyer's lender, or the buyer can send the accepted offer to their lender, either way. Once that happens, that's when the lender actually starts completing the official application. You cannot start an application on the lender side without an actual purchase agreement. You can start the pre-application, everything. So once the purchase agreement, the system generates some disclosures that are sent directly to the buyer. One of them is a disclosure called intent to proceed. And what that is that's a basic document that's maybe anywhere 2 to 3 sentences that advises that the buyer is giving the lender permission to proceed with their loan application process and to run their credit and to proceed with putting their loan approval process forward. That is the document that you want to receive from the lender, or you want the lender to send you an email to say that the buyer has given them written authorization to proceed with the loan approval process. One of those two documents is what you will provide to the listing agent within whatever time period that you put right here. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
So that particular deal that I'm doing right now, we're doing seller financing. So would I ask the buyer's agent to provide me a letter of intent so that my seller can provide or can do his background and credit check?
You can, yet ultimately that's now the financing is now between the actual buyer and the seller. You're not helping them with the financing part, right?
No, I just figured that you would need you would need permission from the buyer to perform any kind of background or credit check.
I'm not sure that it would need, I mean, that's a great question. I'd have to dig into that a little bit. You could
I don't
write
want to get
some,
my seller in trouble by, if he pulled a credit and then he denied and then they.
well, let me ask you this. Is the seller working with an attorney to work on that financing and that contract part?
Yes.
I would probably, that might be something in there in that agreement. And I would defer that to the attorneys on that part. If the buyer through the agent does not provide this, the buyer is in default of the contract. What this means is if this document does not get delivered to the listing agent and then ultimately the seller in the time frame that's here, you'll either need to do an amendment to the contract, or the seller has the right to cancel the contract and retain the buyer's deposit because they're in default of this term. Does everybody understand that?
No, I don't. Can you
Okay.
just go back a little bit?
So tell me more about your question of what you don't understand.
So how many days do you usually give the buyer?
Traditionally, I would say 5. However, right now, based on the buyer's lender and who they're using, you can put 7 days, you can put 10 days.
Okay, and I'm not understanding what form you need. I'm not understanding, because once you have the purchase agreement and they both sign the purchase agreement, and then you're saying you need another form that.
So it's not a form that's generated by you. It's a form that's generated by the lender.
Okay, so the
So
lender will send it to the seller?
No, the lender will give it to the buyer.
Okay,
It's the disclosures that the lender sends out disclosures once they put the official application into their system when they have the purchase agreement. So you can defer to the lender to say, please read lines 77 through 79. Please send me a copy of the intent to proceed disclosure once it's been signed.
okay.
Another question about condos. I'm working with a client right now that's looking to buy a condo, and I never represented anybody that bought a condo. So I, of course, contacted some lenders and asked them for some pointers.
Is it about financing, or is it something that's a little bit later?
I don't know. It would be about, I think it's probably about a little bit later. It's about the condo questionnaire, what they call it.
Okay, yeah, so we'll come to that. Absolutely, and I'll show you that as well. Okay. So as you can see, as it goes through, if the buyer fails to make the loan application and to supply the seller with written documentation, the seller may, at the seller's option, elect in writing to terminate the agreement and declare the agreement null and void. So would, all right, so then it talks about prorations and other costs. Trying to let her in. It looks like she was connecting to audio. Okay, appraisal. So this is where you advise if the appraisal is conditioned or is not conditioned on the property being less than the sales price. I would recommend that unless you're doing a multiple offer, probably for an investor, which is an all cash sale, and there is 100% confidence that the buyer does not want to do an appraisal, I would not check that this sale is not conditioned on an appraisal, because this always gives the buyer opportunity and an option to cancel if an appraisal comes back at less than the sales price, agreed upon sales price, and the seller is not willing to negotiate that price. So traditionally, the appraisal, when it's financed, is ordered by the lender, and everything is coordinated through the lender and the listing agent. If the appraised value is less than the sales price and the buyer shall provide the seller with a copy of the appraisal, I usually say within 3 calendar days. It really shouldn't be any more than that, because you want to provide that documentation to the seller as soon as you can. Let's say the buyer gets the appraisal back on a Friday. That means you need to get it to them by Monday. So I usually put 3 days for here. And then within X number of days after the seller's receipt of such written documentation of the appraised value, the buyer shall have the option to pay the sales price agreed upon prior to the appraisal, or to void or cancel this agreement unless the seller agrees to reduce the sales price to the appraised value. I would tell you that I would not put anything more than 3 days here. This is going to, the seller should have 72 hours to consider it, or whatever. If they get it on a Friday, they need to respond to you by Monday. Sometimes I'm seeing agents put 7 days, 10 days. Honestly, I don't know that I would put anything more than 3. Within 3 days, you should be able to get the documents over to all parties. Any questions on that? Okay. Your deposit. You can put your deposit amount, which is here, or you can put a percentage of the sales price. Guys, this is the deposit. This is not the down payment. So this is usually $1,000, $2,000, $2,500, $5,000, $10,000, based on the sales price of the, based on the sales price. And so at that point, you can put this or the percentage. I usually just put NA for the percent of the sales price and just put the amount. And then from there, what you want to look at is, most of the time you're not going to have a cash deposit. So it's either going to be certified funds, a personal check.
Jody?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. So for line 110, it's not the deposit amount?
It is the deposit amount, but I'm telling you to put I would put the amount rather than the percentage.
Okay.
So, and then some places have electronic transfer or wiring. And then the deposit, you indicate whether it's the listing broker, the selling broker, which is the buyer's broker, or a third party. If it's a third party, you're going to want to make sure that the buyer and seller sign right here.
What's typical for that? For the deposit being held by? Because
It's usually held by the listing broker. I think what we're seeing now for a good bit is there are some smaller brokerages, some mom and pop brokerages that don't have their escrow accounts set up. Oops, sorry. Okay, sorry about that, guys. They don't have their escrow accounts set up. So they're gonna ask either the buyer's broker to hold the deposit or title company or the title company.
and do we have are we able to get deposits wired directly to our brokerage?
No, we are not set up for electronic transfer or set up for wires, because it actually costs to receive a wire and it costs to send a wire. And so for right now, we're not set up. We're not set up for that.
Gotta get a Keller Williams Cash App.
Negative, because Cash App has to go to a business account or
Nice.
Social Security. And then that also just puts a little bit more at risk. So
I was just
if they
playing.
want to wire it, I would recommend doing sending it to the title company, and they can wire it to the title company. Okay. So then we kind of proceed forward again with the property address, street, city, state, zip, all of that. Here's, you guys really read the contract on all of this. Here's all the options that you have for the return of the deposit by the buyer, right? If it's during the inspection period and due diligence, and that's why it's making sure that the contract dates and timelines are adhered to. If the buyer's inability to obtain a loan or if they're denied, as long as they are in compliance with lines 72 and 75 and they've made good faith efforts, then they can have their deposit returned if they're unable to obtain financing. 83. Yeah, same thing. So if the seller declares the agreement null and void, I just learned something. If the seller declares the agreement null and void for failure of the buyer to comply with written documents as was set forth in lines 80 through 85, that's sending them their, that's sending them the intent to proceed from the buyer. The buyer will get their deposit back. I always thought the buyer didn't, so I learned something new. I see that, like I got clarification on that today. If the buyer conditions on the sales price on the appraisal and the appraisal is less than sales price and the seller will not reduce the sales price, then the buyer can cancel and return of the deposit. If the buyer receives if it's properties that are leased and the buyer has the opportunity to go over the lease agreements and is not in agreement with them and chooses to terminate, they'll get it back. If the seller is unable to deliver the buyer an approved sewage and water inspection report, in most of our area, this is not a requirement. However, there are some of the cities and some usually some properties that are unincorporated where the seller would need to provide this. And the same thing for the septic and water well addendum. If you have a property that is currently leased, then it is the buyer's right to receive a copy of all of the written leases and unpaid special assessments, like for a condo or stuff, within 5 calendar days. Then the buyer has 5 days after receipt to notify the seller whether they're acceptable to the buyer. So this is where it comes in, that if there is a lease on the property that the buyer is not okay with extending or continuing that lease, this is where they can opt out or potentially renegotiate that leases during this period. So then you'll have whether it's a new home construction or not a new home construction, and then the addendum will follow.
Is that, I'm sorry, is that, go back up a little bit? On the leases and special assessments, would that require a separate document that's inside Instanet, like a special type of document that states that they're an acceptance of the leases and special assessments?
No, it's just kind of, it's on the agents to make sure that the buyer gets a copy within those 5 days. And that you actually have your client review them within 5 days.
Okay.
But if they weren't in agreement, then you would have to do a separate addendum?
You would probably do either an amendment to the contract, or you would have them revise the leases and go from there. So for the inspection and due diligence period, this is where you want to always check your calendar, check for holidays, check for different things, always be on top of with your inspector that you use. I know one of the inspectors that a lot of agents in our office use right now is booked up for 2 weeks. So you always want to be in contact with the preferred inspectors that you use on a regular basis to see what their schedule is like. For this time, anywhere between, I would say, 10 and 14 days is traditionally what we're seeing. If you're representing the seller, I would try and get that close to 10 days as possible. When you're working with the buyer, I would usually just put 14 days to give you a little bit of a safety net, and then get that inspection scheduled as soon as you can, because there may be things that come up during the inspection period that you need to do additional inspections or additional research on. So your inspection period starts the day following the day that you have a fully accepted and executed offer. And so what I would recommend is that with a calendar, with a task list, whatever you have, get your system in place so where you know what day your property inspection response is due. Ideally, if the buyer is wanting to cancel the contract because of inspections, you have to get that submitted by the end of your inspection period. Any questions on that? So the next part goes into what the buyer's options are. So buyer's option number 1 is after the inspections, they can completely terminate the agreement if they're saying this isn't for me. I don't even want to ask for repairs or reductions. I just want to cancel. That would be option number 1. And you submit a cancellation agreement, and then you can also submit the property inspection response advising that it's canceling, and I'll show you those as well. Or the option number 2 is that the buyer would submit in writing using the property inspection response form the deficiencies and the desired remedies to the seller. Then the seller has 72 hours to provide a response. And we'll go into that form shortly. Once the seller responds, then the buyer has 72 hours to then respond whether they agree or whether they disagree and want to cancel. Now, there are times where the seller may respond and the buyer still kind of wants to negotiate. While there's no official form for that, you can pick up the phone and call the agent and say, will the seller consider this, or will the seller consider this, and kind of make some adjustments from there. And then you would just do an amendment to the property inspection response. Any questions on that? Private water and sewer system, there's an option for, there are private water systems, there are private septic systems, or there's no private septic and waters and treatment systems from here. So you would select which one of those. Usually if you're going to have somewhere that's out with a lot of land or in unincorporated areas of the city, those are where you see those more often than in the middle of the city. Home service or home warranty. So you're going to check whether it will or will not be purchased at the closing. If it is being purchased, you'll put a cost not to exceed here. The prices, I will tell you, probably range anywhere between $550 and $700. And then you'll put whether it's to be paid by the buyer or the seller. And the home service warranty will be ordered, I would put by the buyer's agent. So you representing the buyer would order it on their behalf, send the information to the title company for it to be put on the closing disclosure. Again, coming down to page 6, property address and the date. How are we doing on questions? Okay, I'll keep going. Here's where we have the warranty or the as-is clause with waiver and right of reddition. So a lot of times you hear a seller saying, or maybe in the notes, we're selling the property as is, no repairs. What this particular clause says is for if you choose option A, that the sale is with warranties. This is not the home warranty at all. This is the seller and the buyer agreeing that the sale was with full seller warranties as to any claims or causes of action, including but not limited to reddition pursuant to Louisiana Civil Code. If this option is checked, traditionally what this means is the seller will warranty the property on any defects for a set period of time. If there is a roof leak, if there's maybe there's some electrical issues or the ceiling fan breaks or different things, then the seller agrees that they will cover that personally. Usually you do not see this in Louisiana at all. Most of the time we're seeing option B, which is sale or as is without warranties. And this is where the seller and buyer acknowledge and recognize that the property is being sold and purchased as an as is, and that the buyer does waive release the seller from any claims or causes of action for reddition pursuant to the Civil Code. And that's going to be part in your active sale in their documents. So in other words, if the refrigerator that came with the house breaks in 6 months, the seller cannot go back to the buyer cannot go back to the seller and say the refrigerator is no longer working, I need you to replace it. Does that make sense to everybody? So when you choose option B, for the most part, that's where you'll see that disclosure, the as is and waiver of reddition disclosure that is accompanied pretty much all of the purchase agreements and with your property disclosures. And then if it's a new home, you would obviously check option C. For merchantable title and curative work, this is where the contract is automatically extended for X number of days. Sometimes we see 30, sometimes we see 15 in here. If the seller cannot provide a clear title. And so what that means is the title company will start researching the title, and they'll go back 20 to 30 years in Louisiana to make sure that the property's been transferred properly, filed properly, all of the necessary documents, and that the seller has 100% authority to sell the property. In the event that they cannot show 100%, or there's a hiccup with it, right? This automatically extends the contract. Usually what you'll see here is, let's say that there might be a lien on the house if there was ever the seller that maybe didn't pay a contractor, or maybe they hadn't paid their property taxes in a couple years and there's a tax lien on the property. For anything to get all of those liens cleared, it automatically extends the contract for the buyer and the seller. Does that make sense? Usually we see like we'll do an amendment to extend it, yet if it falls under title work, it's not needed. It's just always a best practice to do that amendment to extend. And then the final walkthrough. These are some options of when the seller, if there's default by the seller, if there's default by the buyer. State guidelines require that the mold-related hazards notice be put here, that the sex offender notification be here, flood advises that it follows Louisiana law. And guys, this is pretty important too, where it says deadlines, time is of the essence and all deadlines are final. Keep in mind that when you have an offer that's set to expire, once it expires, it's expired. Your property inspection time, your inspection period, once it hits 11:59 on the night that it ends, it's over, like it's ended. And so I think what we're seeing a lot is agents feel that there's some flexibility with timelines and deadlines, and that is absolutely not the case. So it's very important that you guys know where we are in your contract process with all of the timelines. Your additional terms and conditions, what you would put here is seller to pay $5,000 towards buyer's closing cost and prepaid items at active sale, or you can put sometime any other terms, maybe if the buyer is asking something of the seller to install fence on or before 5 days before closing, different things that might be out of the ordinary, you can definitely put here.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the listing that I have, my seller was providing a buyer's agent bonus of $1,000, but it was upon reasonable offers. And then the offer that we got was lower than the asking price. And there was no clarification as to what a reasonable offer was. And the buyer's agent never mentioned anything about the bonus. So how do we address that if it, in the right way at least?
I would probably have put it in here. Yet if it's in MLS, I always do a printout of when you show the property or of when you put the offer in. Yet that does seem a little vague as far as, and what could be considered reasonable. So
Right.
I would put it in here.
Yeah, it's in the MLS, but when she made the offer, she didn't.
Well, and so the other part is maybe instead of using the term reasonable, they should have used the term acceptable. Yet whenever you see that, I would always try and put it in here or do an addendum to the contracts to add that to it.
But that would be a buyer's agent thing to do, correct?
Ask me that again.
That would be the buyer's agent, a role that the buyer agent would have to play in doing, right? Because it would be their commission that they're talking about.
Well, if you're representing the buyer in that case, I would put it in there.
Right.
Is this a property you're under contract on, or you're just asking in general?
So I'm the selling agent or the listing agent on the property that I'm under contract on, and the buyer's agent didn't mention anything about the bonus, but I had mentioned in the MLS that the seller was offering $1,000 concession, or not a concession, but a buyer's agent bonus.
So I would probably change that from reasonable to acceptable. And then is the seller still honoring that?
I actually forgot about it, and I think maybe the buyer's agent forgot about it. But looking over everything that yesterday, I remembered it, and I was like, "Oh crap! Oh no, nobody talked about it." Let's talk about that offline a little bit, because we've got Joyce coming in for Broker's Brew, and I want to get through our contract, and then we can kind of set up another time to continue some of the other documents that we need to use. So here's where if your property is contingent on the sale of another property, or if that buyer's is, this is where you would check it here. For your condo addendum, this is where you check it. This FHA amendatory clause, if it's an FHA loan, you can check that box, yet know that the FHA amendatory clause is generated by the lender. It's always generated by the lender. The lender will send it to the buyer. Once the buyer signs it, the lender sends it to the buyer's agent, gets the buyer's agent to sign it, and then asks the buyer's agent to send it to the listing agent and the seller to have them sign it. So while you can check it saying it's going to be a part of the contract, it is going to come from the lender. And if you have a new construction addendum or the deposit held by the third party addendum, you'll put that in there. Your condo addendum
that should be provided by the listing agent in the MLS documents. That's not something that the buyer creates. That's something that is filled out by the seller, just like any other disclosure. And if it's not there, then you would get with the listing agent to ask for that. Everything must be accepted in writing. This is where you're advising, you can mail, hand deliver, overnight deliver, fax, email, or other electronic submissions are acceptable. Buyer's agent email address, you can input that there. You input the seller's email address here. Making sure that in order for it to be a full contract, it's signed by the buyer and the seller. Your expiration of the offer is here. Make sure you fill out all of that. Traditionally 24 to 48 hours, just depending. I would tell you if it's a hot property, the less amount of time that you can give them will probably benefit your buyer. If it's something that they're asking for more time because it's a succession property or it's a relocation property, just kind of consider that. You'll check the boxes here for your buyers. Make sure you fill out the buyer's name right here. Please don't leave that blank. Put that in there because sometimes you can't understand their signature. You want their name on it. And then this right here, this offer was presented to the seller or buyer. This is where the listing agent is going to acknowledge that they received it and sent it to and presented it to the seller. Then when you get it back, it's either going to be accepted, rejected, or countered. And this is where you'll complete your name right here saying that you presented the offer, whether it was accepted, rejected, or countered, to your buyer. Please do not leave that blank. That's part of the contract, and that is something that LREC looks for to make sure that you have that. Any questions on the purchase agreement? Okay, let me go back to,
Jody, I have a quick question.
yeah.
I missed one thing. The title work was, how many days was that?
I think it just depends. I see some people putting 15 for about 2 weeks. Some people put 30.
Okay, that's what I
You
thought.
know, I think ultimately it protects the buyer and the seller.
Yeah.
So it protects the buyer when, let's say the seller has a tax lien that they want to clear, and maybe the seller gets a little salty and isn't quite ready to pay that tax lien, or realizes that their proceeds are going to be $10,000 less because it's a tax lien or because it's a lien from a contractor. And then the seller says, oh, forget it, then I'm just not selling the property. This kind of protects the buyer, saying that the contract is automatically extended for 15 days, 30 days, whatever it may be. It could be something simple like sometimes there's a judgment against one of the seller's names that just simply needs to be cleared up, and you might just need a little bit of time. So rather than having you do an amendment to extend the contract because it's part of the title work and providing the clear title, it automatically extends the contract.
Okay, thank you.
Sometimes we see amendments and addendums that are part of during hurricane season, where you may see some agents and some brokerages saying if there's a hurricane in the Gulf and insurance cannot be obtained, then we're automatically extending the contract for 7 days after such storm has cleared the area. Okay. So we probably need to make this class a little bit longer than an hour because I feel like we only got through a couple forms. And we'll do another one where we kind of go over the backup offer addendums, the amendment to the purchase agreement, the contingency addendums, and maybe some extension forms. Guys, here's an extension form right here that you can use, and it's super easy because you can pick which one you want to extend, whether it's you want to extend the offer, keeping the offer open for a set period of time. Maybe if you have multiple sellers that need to to review and look at it. This is where you can extend your property inspection period. And then this is also where you can extend your loan approval or your active sale. So it's one form that you could use for either one of those. So that's always a good form to use as well. Okay. We will continue on round 2 of this. And in the meantime, does anybody have any specific questions from where we are? Okay. So TJ, I know you had talked about the condominium addendum. Does anybody else have any specific questions that they would like me to focus on and make sure we cover next time?
No, go ahead.
I'm working on a lease purchase. So that's something I want to go over.
So a lease or lease purchase?
I'm sorry, a lease.
Okay, so yes, yes, we can definitely take care of that for you.
Jody, do you post these recordings?
Yes, I will. This one's recording today, so absolutely, I'll send you the YouTube link.
Perfect, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody else? Okay, perfect. So I am going to stop recording. Let's stop share. We're gonna stop recording.